Most medieval knights never rescued a princess. A lot of them couldn't even read. And here's the weird part. Once you see what the job actually was, the real question isn't how did knights become legendary, it's why would anyone volunteer for this? Because nearly everything we picture, shining armor, noble bloodlines, honorable duels, is the highlight reel. The day-to-day reality was sweat, debt, paperwork, disease, and a business model disguised as heroism. Let's start with the biggest lie, the armor. When people say knight, they imagine a guy sealed inside perfect silver plate like a walking tank. That image mostly belongs to the late Middle Ages. Full plate armor, the movie kind, doesn't really dominate until the 1400s, long before knights first show up on European battlefields. For most of the classic knight era, the average knight wore chainmail, thousands of small metal rings linked together. It's impressive until you realize it isn't magic. A hard thrust can still find gaps. Arrows can still punch through at the right angle or distance. And it's not light. Think roughly 25 to 30 pounds, hanging off your shoulders and neck. You'd feel it by lunchtime. And it didn't look good. Real armor wasn't polished chrome. It was dented, scratched, rusty. To slow corrosion, knights rubbed it with oil or animal fat. So the majestic warrior riding toward you probably smelled like a hot, greasy skillet. But the real twist is money. A top-tier suit of plate armor could cost the equivalent of a small farm. Not a saving up for a year expense, a sell your livelihood expense. So most knights did what people always do when they're expected to look rich without actually being rich. They mixed and matched. A decent helmet here, a battered breastplate there, maybe chainmail underneath. Some pieces were inherited, some were bought secondhand, some were scavenged, stripped off dead enemies. It was medieval thrift shopping, except the return policy was death. And nobody talks about heat. Summer campaigns were brutal. Armor turns your body into a radiator trapped in a metal box. Heat exhaustion killed plenty of fighters before swords ever touched. Sometimes the enemy didn't win the battle, the weather did. Now, you've probably heard the story that knights were so heavy they needed cranes to get onto their horses. That's a myth that got popular later. Real combat armor was designed to move. Heavy, yes, but wearable. A knight had to mount a horse, run, climb, wrestle, swing weapons, and survive. Armor makers weren't building costumes, they were building life insurance. Okay, so the armor isn't what we thought. What about the knights themselves? Here's the scandal that would make medieval nobles choke on their wine. The word knight didn't start as noble hero. In many places, it basically meant servant or young man, a fighter, a retainer, someone who could show up when called. For centuries, a lot of knights were basically professional muscle. Some came from minor landholding families, some came from peasant families that scraped together enough money for a horse and weapons, and the aristocracy hated it because it meant status was leaking. Then it leaked harder. By the 1200s, wealthy merchants could buy their way into knighthood in some regions. Freed serfs sometimes climbed the ladder too. Imagine an exclusive country club suddenly letting in the guy who sold them their furniture. Same energy. Old families complained. Money didn't care. And England turned it into something even funnier. Sometimes the crown tried to force rich landowners to accept knighthood, not as an honor, as a revenue play. If you had enough land, you could be pressured into the title and then charged fees for the privilege. People literally avoided knighthood the way you avoid a bad subscription. Because maintaining the lifestyle was ruinous. Horse, armor, weapons, servants, travel, repairs, training, fees. To do it properly, you needed serious income, often the output of hundreds of acres. So yes, a knight could be high status, but the title could also be a financial trap with a fancy name. And the path to becoming one wasn't romantic. It was a childhood shipped away and a decade of unpaid labor. You didn't become a knight at 18. You started around 7. 7. Your family sent you to live in another household, often far from home. You became a page first. That meant serving meals, learning manners, learning languages, learning how to not embarrass yourself in front of powerful people. It's less montage and more tiny employee. Then around 14, you leveled up to squire. Level up makes it sound fun. The job was carry equipment, clean weapons, polish armor, manage horses, run errands, and yes, handle the stuff nobody brags about, like chamber pots. You were an all-purpose assistant to a man whose survival depended on details. Because squires weren't just learning swordplay, they were learning logistics. A knight's gear could involve dozens of straps, buckles, and pieces. You had to know how to put it on in the right order, quickly, under pressure. Mess it up, and a plate slips. A gap opens. Your knight bleeds out. No pressure. Training could also be brutal. Horse drills, lance drills, targets designed to punish bad timing. One famous training device was a rotating target with a swinging arm. Hit the target too slowly, and the arm comes around and knocks you off your horse. Now imagine doing that daily as a teenager. And here's the part nobody puts in the legend. Many squires never became knights, not because they were cowards, because the money ran out. The dubbing ceremony, the public "now you're a knight" moment, could be expensive. Clothes, weapons, gifts, feasts, church donations. Years of labor, and you might walk away with nothing. So after all that, what did knights actually do? This is where the myth collapses completely. Most knights weren't full-time battlefield superheroes. They were land managers. They owed military service to a lord, often measured in weeks, not months. Think around 40 days in some feudal arrangements. The rest of the year? Rent, courts, local disputes, maintenance, politics. A lot of knightly life was paperwork and arguments about boundaries, stolen livestock, damaged crops, who owns that tree on the property line. It's less quest for glory and more HOA president with a sword. And many knights actively avoided combat. Some hired substitutes to fulfill their service. Yes, medieval temp workers. Someone else shows up to fight. The knight stays home protecting the asset that actually matters, the land. Because steady wealth wasn't on the battlefield, it was in monopolies. Control a mill and peasants pay you every day. Control the oven, the wine press, the bridge, same story. In some places, people couldn't legally use their own equipment. They had to use the lord's and pay a fee. Knights could earn more from a mill than from a lifetime of battlefield loot. Some even built bridges just to charge tolls. Very noble, very practical. So if that's real knighthood, what was chivalry? This is where the glossy brochure shows up. The ideal, behavior, protect the weak, respect women, fight with honor. A lot of it was written and promoted by people who didn't fight. Clerics, poets, courts that wanted warriors to be less unbearable at dinner. It was as much reputation management as morality. And in practice, honor often meant something simpler: ransom economics. If you captured a noble enemy, you didn't kill him, not because killing was immoral, but because a living noble could be sold back to his family for a fortune. Mercy had a price tag. A rich prisoner was an investment. But peasants and common soldiers, they usually weren't protected by this code. They couldn't pay ransoms, so they didn't matter in the chivalry economy. Villages burned, livestock stolen, people massacred, and the poems stayed quiet. Want to see chivalry without the marketing? Look at tournaments. Movies show elegant jousts with cheering crowds. Early tournaments were more like organized chaos. Teams of knights fought across miles of real countryside, fields, roads, sometimes even towns. The goal wasn't score points, it was capture opponents and ransom them. It was a violent business conference. And tournaments were perfect for settling grudges. Accidents happened. A blow landed too hard. A weapon slipped. Oops, no investigation. The church often condemned tournaments, even threatening serious penalties. Knights showed up anyway, because the money was too good. Some famous knights built fortunes by capturing hundreds of other knights over a career. That's not sport. That's serial kidnapping with applause. Now add the most expensive part of the entire operation, the horses. A proper war horse could cost many times more than a regular horse, and you didn't just need one. You needed a combat horse, a travel horse, pack animals, backups, because horses died constantly. Disease, exhaustion, wounds, arrows, broken legs. Lose your horse, and your odds collapse. A knight on foot becomes a slow target. And these horses were trained like weapons, biting, kicking, trampling. An armored animal is basically a battering ram with opinions. They were so valuable, they often ate better and received better medical attention than the people working the fields. Now zoom out and add the big, holy adventure, the Crusades. There were true believers, sure, but there was also a very human incentive, inheritance. In many systems, the firstborn got the land and title. Younger sons got not much. The Crusades offered a terrifying but tempting deal. Go far away, fight, and maybe win land, wealth, and a reset button. Conveniently, taking the cross could also pause certain obligations back home. For some, the spiritual mission came bundled with financial relief. And then you get moments that expose the whole thing. Crusaders who never reached the Holy Land, but attacked and looted other Christian cities instead, because money and politics changed the target. Faith mattered, so did opportunity. Humans contain multitudes. But here's what killed knights more reliably than enemy blades: the invisible stuff. Infection. A small wound becomes a slow death. Camp sanitation, contaminated water, dysentery that sweeps through armies like wildfire. Thousands of men and animals packed together, waste everywhere, heat, flies, poor medicine. A knight who survived years of campaigning wasn't just skilled, he was lucky. So what finally killed knighthood? Not one invention, not one battle. Math. Training a knight could take 15 years and a fortune. Now compare that to a peasant with a pike. A few months of drilling, a long spear, and suddenly he can kill the most expensive soldier on the field, especially in disciplined formations. The cost-to-kill ratio became absurd. Then the Black Death shattered the labor system that fed the feudal machine. With fewer workers, survivors could demand wages and mobility. The old economic structure that funded knights, fixed obligations, captive labor, started cracking. And kings noticed something else. Feudal armies were unreliable. Knights served their required days and went home. Professional soldiers, paid, trained, centrally controlled, stayed until the job was done. Power shifted upward. The old knightly world slowly became a relic. Some knightly families adapted. They kept names, crests, and titles, but traded swords for law, politics, commerce. The legend stayed. The job disappeared. And we never stopped romanticizing it. We loved the mounted warrior fantasy so much that we dragged it into the modern age, right up to cavalry charges meeting machine guns. Some myths don't die because they're true. They live because we want them to be. So the next time you picture a perfect knight in shining armor, remember, the real medieval knight was more likely a stressed-out landlord wearing mismatched gear, smelling like oil and sweat, trying not to go broke while pretending it was all about honor.